Okay. All right. So again, there are handouts in the back. So if you want a handout in the back there. So again, this is week 3 of this course. This week we're going to look at the first part. We're going to look at the story of Balaam and Balak over 2 weeks. It's kind of a longer story, lots of stuff there. So we're going to look at it over 2 weeks. So this is the first week. We're going to do the first part of the story this week in Numbers 22, and then we'll look at Numbers 23 and 24, the second part of the story next time. But this week we're going to look at Numbers 22, which is dealing with Balaam, the story of Balaam and his donkey, which and this whole Balaam Balak stuff is probably, in my opinion, maybe the funniest set of stories in the entire Bible. It's just got loads of humor value to it, which we will look at as we go through again this week and next week. So again, we want to start by reading through this, just kind of reading the story, and then work our way through it. So this is again Numbers 22. And the sons of Israel moved on, and they made camp in the plains of Moab, on the other side of the Jordan from Jericho. Now Balak, son of Zippor, was aware of all that Israel had done to the Amorites, and Moab was panicked by the presence of the people because they were numerous, and Moab had a sickening dread of the presence of the sons of Israel. So Moab said to the elders of Midian, "Now this horde of people will lick up all that is around us, as the ox devours the green plants of the field." And Balak, son of Zippor, was king of Moab at this time. So he sent messengers to Balaam, son of Beor, who was at his home in Pethor, which is on the Euphrates River, to summon him, saying, "Look, a people has come out of Egypt. See, it has covered the face of the land, and it is dwelling right in front of me. And now come, please, bind this people with a curse for me, because it is more powerful than I. Perhaps I will be able to strike them and drive them out of the land. For I know whoever you bless is blessed, and whoever you bind with a curse is bound with a curse." So the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian headed out, taking with them the fee for divination. And they came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message. He said to them, "Spend the night here, and I will tell you what the Lord says to me." So the officials of Moab stayed with Balaam. God came to Balaam and asked, "Who are these men with you?" Balaam replied to God, Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. "Look, the people has come out of Egypt and has covered the face of the land. Now come, curse them for me. Perhaps I will be able to fight with them and drive them out." But God said to Balaam, "You shall not go with them. You shall not bind these people with a curse, because they are blessed." So Balaam got up the next morning and said to the officials of Balak, "Go back to your land, for the Lord won't let me go with you." So the officials of Moab left, and they returned to Balak and said, "Balaam refused to come with us." So Balak tried again, sending a second delegation of officials, larger and more distinguished than the first. And they came to Balaam and said to him, "Thus says Balak, son of Zippor, please do not let anything keep you from coming to me, for I will absolutely honor you greatly, and I will do whatever you tell me to do. Just come, please, curse this people for me." So Balaam replied to the servants of Balak, "Even if Balak were to give me his entire house full of silver and gold, I am completely unable to do anything, small or great, outside of what the Lord my God commands. So now please stay here tonight as your compatriots did, and I will find out what more the Lord will say to me." God came to Balaam that night and said to him, "Since these men have come to summon you, get up and go with them. But you will only do what I tell you to do." So Balaam got up the next morning, saddled his donkey, and headed out with the officials of Moab. But God's anger burned because he was going, and the angel of the Lord took his stand in the road to oppose him. He was riding on his donkey, and 2 of his servants were with him. Now the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with his drawn sword in his hand. So she turned out of the road and went into a field. And Balaam beat the donkey to turn her back to the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path through the vineyards with a stone wall on either side. Again, the donkey saw the angel of the Lord. So she pressed herself against the wall, and in the process pressed the foot of Balaam against it. So he beat her again. And the angel of the Lord went further along and stood in a narrow place where there was nowhere to turn and no way to get around. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord this time, it just lay down under Balaam. Then Balaam's anger burned, and he beat the donkey with a switch. Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you've beaten me these 3 times?" Balaam replied to the donkey, "Because you made a fool of me. If only there were a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now. The donkey said to Balaam, asked Balaam, am I not your donkey on which you've ridden all your life up to this day? Have I ever been in the habit of treating you this way? He said, no. Then the Lord uncovered Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with his drawn sword in his hand. And he bowed down and prostrated himself on his face. And the angel of the Lord said to him, why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I myself have come forth to oppose you, because your path has been reckless before me. But the donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. If she had not turned away from me, surely even now you I would have killed, but her I would have left alive. And Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned because I did not know you were standing in the road to confront me. And now, if it is evil in your eyes, let me return to my home. The angel of the Lord said to Balaam, go with these men, but you will only say what I tell you to say. So Balaam went with the officials of Balak. There's a little bit more to chapter 22, but we'll leave that for next week, since that follows into the next element of the story. So there is the story of Balaam and his donkey. Again, like we did last week, we're going to start with context, because again, all these stories are coming out of a context. They don't just magically appear out of nowhere, right? There's a context to these, and this context is somewhat significant in this case and what's going on here. So with this Balak donkey story, what's the context here? What's gone on before the story appears in Numbers 22?
Israelites that come out of Egypt.
Okay, so we have had the Israelites, we've had the Exodus, right? The Israelites, God has brought the Israelites out of Egypt after being there for 430 years. Okay, good.
They've already wandered 40 years in the desert.
Okay.
They started attacking into Canaan, right?
Okay, good. So right, so then they've been they've been wandering around for 40 years. Right, so they came out of Exodus. They had the Sinai covenant, right? They hung out in Sinai for about a year with the Sinai covenant, getting all those rules, and then they start moving on again, and that's earlier in the book of Numbers, right? So the book of Numbers actually has a lot of important history in it. So they wrap up stuff at Sinai, they move on. In Numbers 13 and 14, they come to the Promised Land, and they get there, and they send the 12 spies in, and Joshua and Caleb say, "Hey, this is great. We should go in." The other 10 say, we're gonna get killed. This is terrible. The Israelites, being good Democrats, they went with the majority vote, and they said, we're scared. Let's go back to Egypt. It was better there. Okay, which here God has brought them out of Egypt where they were miserable. He brings them to the Promised Land. They say they'd rather be in Egypt. That's a major slap in God's face. So he's like, fine, you don't want it, you don't have to have it. You can wander in 40 years, run around the desert for 40 years instead. And they're like, oh wait, we change our mind. We want to take it back. They try to, they fail. Moses says, you can go, but God isn't going with you. And so they spend 40 years wandering in the desert, right? And now, after those 40 years of wandering, which number skips over very quickly, kind of those 38 years in between kind of disappear sort of instantly. It doesn't spend much time dwelling on the wandering. But now, 40 years later, 40 or 38 years later, they're back on the east side of the Jordan. And that leads us to this story. So one day, Balak, king of Moab, gets up, takes his coffee out on the veranda, is looking around, and he sees all these people around him. Why does he get so freaked out? He sees all these people, and he goes into a major panic. Like if you read the terms there in Hebrew, it is like they're like the people of Moab are like basically like nauseous. Like they're so scared, they're sick to their stomach with fear because of the presence of Israel. It's a rather large group. Okay, we got a lot of people on your doorstep. Why is that so concerning?
I think they knew what they were that they were going to be coming to that land.
Okay, they may have known that Israel's coming to Canaan.
Hadn't they already wiped out a couple of kings?
Yeah. If you look at the immediate context right before this, and we'll talk about this in a moment. Yeah, if you look at this, right, he was aware of all that they had done to the Amorites. Right? Right, they were afraid that Israel was going to take their land. We'll talk about those Amorites in a moment here. But they were afraid that Israel had their sights, right? You've got all these people, and they think they're going to conquer us. They think that our land is now in jeopardy. Balak looks at Israel, and he's afraid that they're going to make him the next Sihon and Og, which were the Amorite kings. So these are these kings. There's these kings on the east side of the Jordan. Sihon was king of Heshbon. Og was king of Bashan. And Israel's just walking through. They're just going through the land, and they come to Sihon's territory and say, "Hey, can we pass through?" And his response was to come out in military force and try to fight them. Okay? Very unfriendly. And so Israel wipes them out. And then Og decides he's going to try to fight them because he didn't learn from Sihon, and Israel wipes him out too. And so, Balak, who watches CNN, who gets the military reports, right? He is aware that this has happened. He's perfectly aware of what has just happened to the Amorites. He's got all these people on his doorstep who've just wiped out two rather powerful Amorite kings, right? And he's thinking, I'm next, right? He is terrified that Israel's going to do to Moab what they just did to the Amorites. And so again, this is the immediate preceding context. What the territory of Heshbon and Bashan that becomes later the inheritance of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. So that's what their territory becomes. And again, this is what, if you look at Numbers, this is what it immediately precedes. The story of Sihon and Og is immediately what precedes Numbers 22. Right? Immediately precedes them showing up on the doorstep of Balak. So that's what he's afraid of. He's afraid that they're next. Now, God has told Israel, you can't take Moabite territory. Moab, if you remember, fun little story in Genesis, Moab was one of the sons of Lot, one of his daughters. Tasteful story, but the Bible is willing to just deal with reality. But these were people who were relatives, in a sense, right? This was a descendant of Lot. It's a relative of Abraham. So the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, these were all relatives of the Israelites, so Israel was not allowed to take their territory. Apparently, Moab did not get that memo, though, because obviously they're terrified. They think that they're hosed. They think they're in trouble. And apparently it's not just Moab. When you read the story, apparently Midian, which is another eastern people, which was related to the Israelites through, I think, Abraham's second or third wife, depending on how you count them, Keturah. They're also worried. They're over there living sort of in that same neighborhood as the Moabites. There are a lot of those eastern peoples over there. Apparently, they're also afraid. Apparently, they were in close enough contact with the Midianites or the Moabites that they were afraid that they were also in trouble. So they're afraid, and so they sort of form this coalition that they're going to go in together to try to figure out a way to stop Israel from running them over. And so Balak gets together with his joint chiefs of staff, and they assess the military situation. And he realizes that they don't really have a prayer. If they engage in conventional warfare, they're screwed. So he does what every good military leader does in such a situation. He resorts to unconventional warfare. If conventional warfare won't work, use unconventional warfare. And in this case, that takes the form of spiritual warfare, that he's going to engage in something, right, with the idea of being able to weaken Israel enough that they will then be beatable. So he comes, he says, again, he sends his message to Balaam, please come, bind these people with a curse. Perhaps then they'll be weak enough that I can strike them and drive them out of the land. Right, so he calls on a soothsayer, a diviner, to come and curse Israel, put a curse on them. And the idea is that a cursed Israel would be weaker, it would be beatable then. Okay. And so, it's kind of like the spiritual equivalent of some sort of weapon of mass destruction, right? If I drop, poison gas on you, people get weaker and it's a lot easier to beat them, right? Or something. This is sort of the spiritual equivalent. I'm going to curse you. And in that time, words were very powerful. There's the belief that words could have this sort of very powerful effect and have this kind of effect. Otherwise, Balak wouldn't have done this unless he believed that there was actually some legitimate ability of the curse to do something. So he resorts to this unconventional warfare. I'm going to call on somebody to come, put a curse on Israel. Now they will be weak enough for me to defeat them. And so he sends his appeal. He goes to the USA Today listings of the top soothsayers in the world, goes to the guy on the top of the list, and appeals to him for help. So Balaam was a sort of internationally well-renowned diviner, soothsayer. And so Balak goes in and said, hey, I need your help. Can you come and put this curse on Israel for me? Interestingly, within the way the story works, Balaam can't just get up and go on his own. He requires God's approval before he can go. And we'll talk a little bit more of that when we get to Balaam here. And God shoots down the idea. He said, not going to happen. And in fact, when he says this, the Hebrew construction is very similar to the kind of construction you see in the Ten Commandments, the idea of you shalt not ever kind of thing. It's not like you can't do it now, but maybe later. It's like, this is never going to happen. You're never going to be able to do this, at least in the cursing part, right? The idea of cursing, it's not going to happen. These are people that are blessed, specifically by me. Cursing, it's just not going to happen. Cursing isn't an option here with these people, right? And you can't curse them because they're blessed. So, all right. So we see. Again, we see in this God's work in protecting people. Again, God's sovereignty over these events. Here you have this pagan soothsayer, this pagan king trying to harm Israel, but God is working sovereignly to protect them, even with this pagan soothsayer. He has control over him, and so he tells Balaam he can't go. Balak is, if you read these stories, Balak is a very persistent person. He's, if nothing else, he may not be a very good guy, but at least he was determined. You got to give him some credit for persistence. His people come back, say, Balaam said he's in common. Balak's like, what? So he sends another delegation. He sends so the first time he sent sort of the junior VIPs. This time he sends the VIPs. These are the big wigs. Right. Before it was like the junior princes. Now these are the senior princes. He sends the more impressive delegation. Right. He's trying to appeal to Balaam, trying to get him to come. I mean, this indicates sort of the level of his terror, that he is completely unwilling to let the situation with Israel kind of play out. He is terrified of Israel. He needs Balaam to come so that Israel can be cursed so he can beat them, right? Because he's kind of looking at the timetable and he's waiting for Israel to come and wipe him out. And he's trying to get the first strike in, right? Before that happens. So he's basically willing to let Balaam name his price. In essence, it's like, I will give you whatever you want. Just come, please, just come. And so again, he's so desperate because he's so afraid. Israel is terrified. So Balaam, who is this guy? What are we to make of Balaam? Good guy, bad guy?
Was he an Israelite?
No,
He was not an Israelite.
he was not an Israelite.
He lived in what was ancient Babylon, right?
Probably more like what was ancient Aram. So we'll look at a map here in a moment. He was more like sort of Syria, Turkey-ish area today.
I'm reminded of the Magi who came to Jerusalem.
Okay.
Wise men from the east.
Yep.
Not necessarily, they weren't Jews, probably.
Right.
They weren't part of the covenant, but they knew of God anyway.
Okay.
He refers to God as his God.
Yes, he does. He says, the Lord my God,
Right.
right? Let me see what the Lord my God will say.
That's why I was thinking he was an Israelite, is because he said that. And
Right,
if that were the case, then I was like, why would he even consider that?
right, right.
Because this is all like 1400 BC or so, right?
Right, yeah. Roughly 1400 BC. Thereabouts.
Sometimes we assume that they think like we do, but like they thought all these gods were able to be picked up and put down, and depending on the city you're in, and you can kind of,
Yeah,
that like the Israelites were constantly adding idols to their worship of the true God, and they often had no problems with mixing things up like that. So just because he appeals to the true God at times doesn't necessarily mean that that's like his heart commitment as much as his
yeah,
potentially as much as just like that's the God of the hour that he's trying to connect with.
right, right. Yeah. So, right, familiar. Again, Balaam is a pagan diviner. He is a soothsayer. So he's got familiarity with a lot of the gods. So we shouldn't probably make too much of the fact that he uses the name of Israel's God, because he probably knew the names of lots of different gods, and he would appeal to whichever one was most convenient for his purposes at the time. Just to give you an idea that in Joshua here, Joshua speaks of Balaam as a diviner or one who engages in divination. That same word, that exact same word, sort of in plural form, he uses its singular form for Balaam. It's a plural form here in Deuteronomy. You will find that it's right in the midst of all these other really bad things, right? Sacrificing your children in the fire, conjuring up spirits, basically witchcraft, meddling with omens, practicing sorcery, basically all these things that Israel was forbidden to do. That is what Balaam is doing. He is a pagan diviner. He is not an Israelite. He is not a believer. And as we go through the story today and next week, we will see that. We'll see the exact nature of his attitude. But again, from a biblical perspective, from an Israelite perspective, he's engaged in sort of pagan religious practices, which from an Israelite perspective, from a Mosaic law perspective, are inappropriate, right? Wrong. Inappropriate, sort of mild term to use, prohibited. Right? These were forbidden sorts of things to do. To give you some idea of what the author thinks of Balaam is to read how he uses the names of God here. Balaam uses the name the Lord, but the author of the story, when he refers to Balaam, he always just uses the word Elohim, the word God. He never uses the Lord himself when in conjunction with Balaam. He always says God came to Balaam. God said to Balaam. Right? He doesn't say the Lord did, right? To kind of distance himself from these claims that Balaam is making, and this idea that Balaam may think that, but I'm not going to associate Balaam with this sort of, because the Lord is sort of Israelite, the covenant name of God with Israel, right? The name he gave to Moses. This is how you're going to know me within the covenant. And so it's kind of a special name within the covenant. And Balaam's using it, and the author's like, I'm not going to put Balaam in our covenant sort of situation here. He's kind of distancing himself from Balaam. So that kind of tells you what the author thinks of Balaam and his claims, that he's allowing Balaam to say these things, but it's an indication more of Balaam's, again, knowledge of the gods more than the author's willingness to associate them with sort of appropriate religious understanding. And everywhere else in the Bible, especially in the New Testament, but also in other places in the Old Testament, he always gets negative press, right? He's always seen as a bad guy. So don't get misled by the fact that he's using the name of the Lord here to think that maybe he was a believer, that maybe this guy was okay. Right? This guy is a pagan diviner. He's using the name, but it doesn't mean he has any belief in what he's talking about. Just like today, there are lots of people, you can have people who can maybe even speak very knowledgeably about the Bible but have absolutely no belief in what they're talking about, right? Same thing here. Balaam can use the names, but that doesn't mean he actually understands, we'll see that here, understands who this God is that he's using the name of. And certainly doesn't have that sort of what we would consider sort of saving faith or relationship with who God is. He's a pagan diviner. And so this is the guy that Balak calls on. Again, he's internationally renowned. He's well known. He's probably the top of the list because he's not nearby. I mean, he's again up in we're down in Moab. We'll show you the map here in a minute. He's down in Moab. He's going up a ways up to basically like what is modern day Syria or Turkey to get this guy. I mean, this is not the guy just down the street. I mean, he's figuring out who the top guy is, and he's going to get him from wherever he has to get him, because that's how worried he is about Israel, and he's trying to get the best. He wants to make sure this happens. Balaam is also mentioned in, there's actually some extra biblical texts called the Tel Dir Allah texts, which are basically in what was then probably Ammonite territory, what is modern day Jordan, that they date. Some people date it to the 700s. Some people probably date it to like the 500 or 400s BC. But they found some texts that also refer to Balaam in sort of in an extra biblical context. Again, giving support to the historicity of the biblical text. And it talks about Balaam in pretty much exactly the same sort of terms the Bible is, a sort of pagan diviner who could be called on to kind of do these pagan religious practices. So we actually do have some extra biblical confirmation of Balaam and who he was, and it also speaks to how internationally renowned he was. You have these extra biblical texts. That isn't just sort of this random guy that appears in the Bible, that he was actually well known in that part of the world. His prophecies, his actions were pretty well known because of the fact that he was written about in other places. Again, he's living in he's living in northwestern Mesopotamia. He's in an area that is referred to in biblical terms, both in sort of in Genesis, pretty much in Genesis, although a little bit also in Deuteronomy. The one that's sort of colored in there in Deuteronomy is the one that actually refers to Balaam. But this is either Aram Naharaim or Paddan Aram. It's basically northwestern Mesopotamia is where that is. We'll see this from the map here. It's actually in the same general area as Haran, where Abraham came from when he came into Canaan. It's on the Euphrates River. Again, it's sort of on the border of modern day, what would be the border of modern day Turkey and Syria. So somewhere around here is where he was from. Again, up here is Haran, down here is Moab, right? So he's making this. So Balak is sending his guys all the way up here, and he's coming so this is not like he's sending him a text, hey, can you come? This is a multiple day event. Maybe a multiple week event to send people up, have them come back, send people up. This is not happening instantaneously. And again, all this while, Balak's looking at the clock and wondering at what point is Israel going to come and wipe me out, right? So he's trying to get this moving because he's afraid. Right. So that's sort of give you a geographical sense of the areas we're looking at here. So. Again, Balak sends a message, it gets rejected, he sends another message, please, 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 please come, right? And God says, and Balaam goes to God and says, hey, these people have come, God says, all right, you can go. So Balaam gets up the next morning and he goes and God gets angry with him. And the text says God's anger burned against him because he went. So why is God angry? He just said he could go. Why is he angry with them for going?
Well, you said the first time God gave them sort of a thou shalt not. In other words, never are you ever to curse or go, etc. And then Balaam said, no, I can't go because God won't let me. But let me go ask him again.
Right.
So maybe God allows him to go, but is still angry at him for missing the point. I don't know.
Okay, I think he does miss the point. I think that's the problem. What is the point that he misses?
You can't curse.
You're never to curse Israel.
You're never to curse Israel, but you are to do what? God told him what he was supposed to do.
Only what I told you.
Only what I tell you to do, right? And you'll notice in the translation I've given you, I've emphasized, right? You can go, but I think the issue is, right? This is from Joshua, and there's a similar one in Deuteronomy, right? So this is God speaking. Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, rose up and fought against Israel. He sent and summoned Balaam, son of Beor, to curse you, but I was not willing to listen to Balaam. Which implies, what did Balaam really want to do? He wanted to curse Israel because he's got offered a boatload of dough if he did this, right? And God blessed him and said, so it gives you, so that kind of, the issue seems to be with Balaam's motive, right? That he gets up, when he gets up and goes the next morning, he has every intention of doing what Balak wants. Balak has offered him this huge reward, and right, that's what he's seeing, right? He's leaving with dollar signs in his eyes, right? He's on the route. He's kind of doing math and figuring how many boats he can buy and how many houses and how many jet planes and, you know, a house in the Riviera and all this stuff, right? He's thinking about the reward. Right? He heard the "you can go," right? He didn't hear the "but," or he didn't understand it. One of the sort of the ways that I kind of think about this, and I was thinking about this as I was studying this, is I kind of see Balaam a little bit like a child here, right? So, you know, you have a child whose friend calls them up and says, "Can you come out to play?" And so they go to their parents and say, "Hey, mom, can I go out and play with so-and-so?" And the parent says no, right? And so they go back to their friend and says, "My mom won't let me go," right? That's kind of the attitude you hear with Balaam, right? God won't let me go. This sort of sulking, sort of pouting kind of thing. Well, I want to do it, but God won't let me, right? And so the friend calls up again, and the child goes back to the parent, and the parent says, "You can go, but," right? "You have to be back by dinner," or "but." And the child's like, here's the "you can go" part, and they're all excited because they can go, and they didn't hear the "but." Okay. That's what I see here, is that Balaam hears the "you can go." He doesn't hear, or at least he doesn't understand the "but." You can go, but this is the requirement. And so Balaam thinks that God, the Lord, is, again, he's thinking in pagan terms. He thinks the pagan gods can all be manipulated. You say the right words, you do the right enchantments, you do the right performance, that you can make the gods sort of do what you want, that they're subject to your manipulation. And that's what he's thinking about the Lord. He thinks that the God of Israel is just like the other gods he's dealt with, and that you know, as long as he let him go, he could find a way to bend God to his will. And then he learns the opposite. So, right, so we have the donkey story, right? So he gets up and goes, and in God's anger, so he sends the angel of the Lord, who stands in the way, and the donkey sees it and turns off in the field. So I'm going to ask a series of very obvious questions here to make a point. In the story, who saw the angel of the Lord? Donkey. Who didn't see the angel of the Lord? Balaam. Which one is the spiritual expert? Which one's supposed to be the spiritual expert? Balaam. Right? So here is, right, here's this irony. When you think of a donkey, right, if somebody mentions a donkey, what kind of comes to mind when you think of a donkey? Stubborn.
Oh, we think of the three-letter word.
Strong.
Okay.
Well,
Maybe-
it's an animal, it's not supposed to talk.
Okay, but sort of proverbially, when you think of a donkey, dumb, right? Dumb, silly, right? Maybe you think Eeyore, right? You think of right? You don't think of like genius, right? I don't know, when you ask children, what kind of animal would you like to be? I don't know if I've ever heard a child say, "I want to be a donkey," right? If you're familiar with the Chronicles of Narnia, in the book, The Horse and His Boy, there's this conceited prince, Prince Rabidash. And to teach him humility, Aslan turns him into a donkey, right? And as he's becoming a donkey, he's like, he's panicking. He's like, anything but a donkey, right? You can make me anything, but just don't make me a donkey. A donkey is this idea of something silly. It's ridiculous when he becomes a donkey. That other people can't help but laugh at him, right? In other words, the donkey is not like what we typically think of in the animal kingdom as the sharpest knife in the drawer, right? But this is the irony of the story. The part of the humor of the story is this dumb, stupid animal that is more aware of the spiritual realities around them than the pagan soothsayer who is supposed to be the expert in the spiritual realm. Right? That the dumb animal can see the spiritual reality, and Balaam can't. So in other words, Balak hired the wrong person. Right? Apparently the donkey would have been a better soothsayer than Balaam. Right? This is the irony, is that you've got this donkey that can see the angel of the Lord, but Balaam is the spiritual, internationally renowned spiritual expert, cannot. All right, so continues on here. The donkey keeps going. The angel Lord moves. The donkey keeps going. Keeps seeing it. Keeps reacting to it. Right, and then Balaam is just getting more and more frustrated. Finally, after the third time, he's beating it with a switch. Why is he so mad? Oh yeah, his foot's hurting, right? The second time he got his foot smashed against the wall, so he's kind of not too happy about that.
He's probably with all these VIPs, and he says, "You made a fool of me."
Exactly. Sometimes it's easy when you read it to kind of think that they're off wandering along on their own. But you have to remember he's got some of his own people with him, and he's with all these Midianite and Moabite big cheeses. And these are the super big cheeses that came, and so he's not alone, right? And so here's his donkey just kind of wandering off on its own, and he doesn't understand, right? From Balaam's perspective, he's wandering down the road. The road looks perfectly open to him, and all of a sudden his donkey's veering off into a field and pressing itself against the wall and just laying down underneath him. He has no clue. He doesn't understand why his donkey is doing this, but it's making him look really stupid, really silly in front of all of these other VIPs that he's traveling with. Right, and so and again, this number 3. We talked about this a little bit last time with Abraham and Sarah. That 3 is this kind of a significant number for emphasis. This happens 3 times, which is just further emphasizing just how spiritually blind Balaam is. 3 times the angel of the Lord stood there, and 3 times he didn't see him. But 3 times the donkey did. Again, just how spiritually unaware Balaam is here. He's just not getting it. Okay. So then we have this very fun situation where God opens the donkey's mouth. Right? So if the story wasn't kind of funny enough already with the donkey seeing the angel and Balaam not, it gets even funnier because now the donkey's talking to him. Right? What I think is another element that I think is kind of funny is that Balaam talks back. His first reaction is like, "What? How are you talking?" It's like, "You stupid donkey," and he just has conversations. If talking with his donkey was an everyday thing, right? Which I think also sort of adds to the humor of the story. Maybe as a pagan diviner that he didn't see that as being very strange. I don't know, but it's kind of funny. And you have the situation here where again, in a bit of irony, God opens the donkey's mouth before he opens Balaam's eyes, right? He mentions this a little bit, that Balaam's eyes eventually get uncovered. But first, God opens the donkey's mouth, right? First, before he makes Balaam aware of the spiritual realities, he chastises him by his own donkey. His own donkey kind of gives him kind of gives him a little verbal beating in some sense. And so what the author's kind of doing here is, we've got this miracle. Donkey is talking with a miraculous thing. But he's also pointing out by doing that Balaam's being able to see the spiritual realities is just about as miraculous as a donkey talking. Right? God's opening a donkey's mouth. He's opening Balaam's eyes. He's kind of equating these two things as sort of equally miraculous. That for Balaam to see the spiritual realities, this internationally renowned spiritual diviner, from people see the spiritual realities is just as much of a miracle as for a dumb animal to talk.
You would think that Balaam might decide that this wasn't a good trip to go on with all these things happening.
You'd start to think he would start to.
Telling me maybe I shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
He's probably still seeing dollar signs.
Probably. Well, he doesn't understand what's going on yet. You'd think the donkey talking to him would say something, but again, he's a pagan diviner, so who knows what's going on in his head. But again, there's some more ironies here. Balaam is upset about his donkey making him look silly, and yet he's sitting there having a conversation with his donkey, which can't, in my opinion, look any less silly. I mean, if the VIPs are sitting there and he's watching him, he's conversing with his donkey, they got to be like, "What's he doing?" Right? I mean, that's probably not going to help his
You wonder if
opinion
they
there.
could hear the donkey or calling, he could hear the donkey, or it doesn't say.
It doesn't say. It may have been just him, but even so, I mean, it's the way it's going to appear is look, he's having this, conversation with his donkey. So, and so again, his idea of being humiliated because his donkey is sort of rebuking, why are you hitting me? In my opinion, again, it's just the irony here. The donkey is puzzled. It doesn't understand why he's beating it. It could see the angel of the Lord. It's assuming its master could too. So the fact that it even says, why are you doing this? Just again, further adds to Balaam's humiliation and the fact that he couldn't see what was so obvious to the donkey, right? The donkey's response is just further humiliates and points out exactly how blind Balaam has been here to the spiritual realities. Again, the idea here, which we'll talk about, is opening his eyes in a moment. But again, the idea here is, again, he's so spiritually, here's this international divider, so spiritually, not spiritually aware. Again, it takes a miracle for him to actually see those spiritual realities that are right there in front of him. So there's this other just delicious irony. Balaam says to his donkey, he's so angry with him. If I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now. If only he was aware of the fact that there was a sword in a hand nearby. It's just not his sword in his hand. Right? There's a sword available. But the donkey's not the one in jeopardy. Right? The sword in the hand is poised to kill him, not to kill the donkey. Right? And so here he wants a sword. He's got one. Got to be careful what you wish for.
It's like yelling at your cat. You got to be really, really upset.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, you get a sense of Balaam's personality here, right? That his sort of the selfishness, the pride, a lot of ego here. He's been humiliated in front of these important people. He's trying to look good. He's not a guy with a great deal of patience. Again, he's not a great guy. Again, don't get confused by his use of the name of the Lord at the beginning. He's not a great guy. All right, so again, the angel tells him, why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? Again, the donkey turned away from me. If she hadn't, you would be dead. She'd be alive. So basically what we have here is we have, again, this sort of irony that the only reason Balaam is alive is because of the spiritual awareness of his donkey. Right? He just got saved by his donkey. Right. So again, here's this very self-important soothsayer feeling he's all that in a bag of chips, and he just had to get rescued by his donkey because his donkey is the one with the spiritual awareness and not him. So, right. So all of this is it's just like one smack after another, just one more level of humiliation after another here for Balaam. Right. And again, the idea here, if she had not turned away from me, right, I would have killed you, but her I would have left alive. So basically the implication is that Balaam's life is worth less than the donkey's. The donkey was going to live, but you're going to die. Okay. So God is more pleased with his donkey than he is with Balaam. All right. So again, another level of humiliation for Balaam here. And also, also the irony of what Balaam says here, right? Which just further speaks to his blindness, right? I'm sorry, I sinned because I didn't know you were there. He just frankly admitted his own spiritual blindness and his own spiritual lack of awareness there. He's about he thinks he's all that when it comes to the spiritual realm, and he just frankly admits that he had no clue as what was going on around him. Right, it's his job. Right, the whole reason he's being hired by Balak is because he's supposed to be gifted in the spiritual realm, and here he frankly admits that he had no clue as to the spiritual reality that was there. So it's this. It's just kind of one thing after another here for Balaam, right? That he starts out on this journey. He thinks he's going to get wealthy, and it just goes downhill for him really fast. And by this point, right, it's a pretty low point, right? He's almost been killed. He finds out his donkey has more spiritual awareness than he does. Right? He's probably not feeling so great right now. So basically, what happens, right, is God's teaching Balaam a lesson. He's basically making a donkey out of Balaam, or if you want to use some other words for donkeys that we tend to use for people who are not very bright stuff. Right? I mean, it's basically what he's doing. He's making Balaam look like a moron. Right? He's humiliating Balaam massively.
Well, he's showing Balaam what he can't know and can't see. In a way, it's merciful, I think.
In a way, well, it's merciful in the fact that he could have killed him and
He
didn't.
doesn't take advantage of it. I mean, he doesn't turn to God and repent of his sin.
Right.
I mean, he goes on to be as evil as he possibly can be because he's manipulative.
Right.
He knows how to manipulate God, or he thinks he does.
Right.
But I think God is incredibly patient with all of us.
Well, absolutely. I mean, he knows what's in Balaam's heart. He could have killed him immediately. He takes this route. But again, what he's doing is he's trying to teach Balaam a lesson. He's trying to knock him down a peg or 10 because he's proud. He's trying to teach him who he is, right? So again, there's this idea, if you see, when you read the story, basically there is a parallel between the behavior of the donkey to Balaam and Balaam's behavior before God, right? So the angel of the Lord says to him, I've come forth to oppose you because your path is reckless. It's kind of precipitate. It's dangerous. And it has been. The Hebrew, there's sort of their past tense verb. It's not just, it's just going to be or is now, but it's been going on sort of in this reckless, there's a pagan soothsayer. That's not something that God is approving of. And so you have this waywardness of the donkey who's not following orders, who's not doing what it's supposed to do. And that's kind of the picture of Balaam here before God, that Balaam is intending to do what he wants. God told him, you're going to do what I told you to do. And Balaam's like, I'm going to do what I want to do. Right? There's a sense of the waywardness of the donkey mirroring the waywardness of Balaam. You also have these parallels, again, between, it talks about God's anger burning against Balaam. And exactly that same phrase is spoken of Balaam's anger burning against his donkey. Also, you have Balaam wishing he had a sword in his hand to punish his donkey. the angel has a sword in his hand to punish Balaam. That there are these parallels between Balaam's attitude towards his donkey and God's attitude towards Balaam. That God feels exactly the same way about Balaam as Balaam feels about his donkey. Right? The same level of anger, the same threaten of punishment. There. And so there's these parallels, again, making this donkey out of Balaam, kind of showing him that your donkey is an object lesson, right? What you see from your donkey, that's what's happening between you and me. That's what I'm seeing from you right now, is this sort of waywardness, this sort of, and you're making me just as angry, and your life is in just as much jeopardy. And so again, we had this sort of humorous story where this donkey is being portrayed as being more intelligent, more discerning, and more noble than Balaam, right? It's come to the rescue. It's saved its master, even though it's kept getting beaten, right? It's the self-sacrificing animal, and Balaam is the moron, right? So again, this humiliating situation where Balaam is made to look inferior to his own donkey, which again, given what we tend to think of donkeys, is very, very humiliating for Balaam here. And so again, the whole episode is meant to humiliate Balaam, because again, he is proud. He thinks that God is somebody that he can manipulate and bend to his will. And so what God is doing is teaching him otherwise, right? That God is showing Balaam, first of all, he's showing, he's teaching him who he really is. He's demonstrating his sovereignty, is demonstrating his ability to do whatever he wants. He's demonstrating that Balaam is subject to him and not God subject to Balaam. And he's emphasizing to him that when he's sort of reminding him of the but, right? That when he said you can go, but you've got to hear the but. So we'll come back to that in a second. Right? God is making sure that Balaam understands who he is, that he's not like the other gods he's familiar with. This is not a God that you can manipulate, and that God is not going to be subject to Balaam, but Balaam is subject to God. When I told you this is what you're going to do, you're going to do it. Right? He's making sure Balaam understands the terms of their agreement. Right? You can go, but you're going to do what I tell you to do. And so then that plays out in what we're going to talk about next week when he interacts with Balak. He kind of learns this lesson well enough that he doesn't fight that anymore. Now, he doesn't learn it well as he should have, which we'll see. But it learns at least well enough that he does what he's supposed to do. So basically, Balak offered him wealth and honor. God said, I'm going to let you live. So basically, he gave him, it's your choice. You can do it Balak once and die, or you can live. And Balaam kind of doesn't take very long to mull it over and says, I'll take the life, please. Right? And he even offers to go back. And he maybe even wanted to go back at this point, because if he goes forward and he doesn't do it Balak once, he's not getting paid. Right? So it's probably for him, he sees this now as a trip where he gets nothing out of it. And so he probably wants to go home, and God's like, sorry, you're on your way. You're going, but you're going to do what I want. And so again, there's this part of this is what you may call a polemic against paganism. Again, what the idea of the story is, this is a pagan diviner, and so it's not just making fun of Balaam, it's making fun of all that Balaam represents within the pagan religious world, that this is what that world gives you, right? Blindness, right? That all of these great spiritual people, they can't see anything. Right? The pagan world is empty. It's nothing. These guys are dumber than their donkeys. And that it criticizes, in criticizing and making fun of Balaam, the author is making fun of the entire sort of pagan religious system, which again is important, because the people reading this are the people of Israel who are coming into that environment. And so it's important for them to hear this polemic and be aware of just how stupid that world is. Unfortunately, Israel still kind of got into it, but it's intending to sort of mock that world so that the Israelites can be aware of just how empty those religious practices are. And so again, we're talking about God's sovereign humor. We looked at last week with Sarah, where God laughs with Sarah. Right? He does something good. These are people who trust him. He does something good for Sarah and Abraham, and he makes laughter for Sarah. Right? God has made laughter for me. Everybody who hears about this is going to laugh. This week is the other end of the other side of the coin, right? The other end of the spectrum, where God laughs at Balaam. Balaam's doing his own thing. He's in rebellion. He's planning to go his own way. He wants to do what he wants. And so God makes a laughing stock out of him. He laughs at Balaam because Balaam thinks he can defy God, and God has to teach him otherwise. And then next week, we'll continue the story and look at how this continues, how this plays out with Balak, where we get, again, more elements of this humor, of this irony, of what's going on here, of people trying to act in defiance of God, rebellion against God, and what happens. So next week, when we go through the second part, we'll talk more about the idea of how all of this fits within the framework of Psalm 2, within the nations raging, because within its entirety, it fits very well within this. We'll talk about that more next time. But you see some of that even here again, just with Balaam and what God does with Balaam, and how he creates a story that's just this really funny story with all this irony in it of what God is doing to Balaam here. And again, trying to teach him who he is, and make sure that Balaam is aware of what he is supposed to do when he goes to Balak, when he gets there, to make sure that he obeys, to make sure he does what he's supposed to, and not what Balak wants, which again plays out next week. So we're going to stop there. Again, we'll pick this up. We'll go into the rest of 22 and 23 and 24. We'll look at the Balaam and Balak episode next time. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
I wonder if he talked about it to anybody else. Guess what happened to me on my way here? My donkey talked. Do you think he hit it or talked about it?
I wouldn't be surprised if that's something you sweep under the rug. It's probably not something you're posting on your Facebook page. Yeah, I got made to look worse than my donkey. Usually people, especially in that day and age, but even today, people aren't usually trying to promote things that make them look stupid.
Yeah.
People aren't really big on broadcasting their humiliation.
I don't feel like he really repented, and he didn't start to view God as the God.
Right. We'll talk about that. We'll see that some next week. Yeah.
I think it's interesting you had mentioned self-sacrificing donkey, and we think of Jesus, and we know your brothers and where you're from, but he was self-sacrificing, and he's trying to save us from death, and he gets made fun of, and he gets beat, and
Right. That's true. Yeah.
we're the stupid ones.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
we think we're not.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're too much like Balaam. Yeah. That's very true. Yeah, the donkey's doing the right thing. It gets. I mean, it just saved its master's life, and he's getting punished for it. Unjustly. Yeah.
Reminds me of the 7 sons of Sceva story in the New Testament. I don't know if
Yeah.
we're going to talk about that one later.
No, I really didn't get to that one, but yeah.
No, it's pretty funny.
It is. It is. There are a lot of funny stories in the Bible. We're not going to have time to get to all of them, unfortunately. There are a lot of funny stories.